Hi, and welcome to Rule of Carnage. My name's Glenn Ford. I'm a games developer and designer, and I'm here chatting with Mike Hutchinson.
Hi, I'm also a games designer and developer.
And we're going to be chatting about designing better miniatures games. So today, what we're going to be talking about is trying to make moments of something for moments of nothing. This is something I think we've talked about a few times on our various videos and podcasts. It's ways that you can get your game to create moments when otherwise you're going to have nothing happen. Make sure that things get switched on instead of getting switched off. The example I think I like to use in relation to this is that within board game design, there are sort of three great anathemas that will immediately turn swathes of people away from a game. And they are paper money, roll and move, and miss a turn. And miss a turn is one of the great moments of nothing in a game. It's just a little moment where the game just goes, are you enjoying yourself? You having fun? No more fun for you, my friend. Sit off and wait until I allow you to maybe enjoy things again. And so there are often moments within tabletop miniatures games where the game decides to turn off what's happening, decides to say, no, there's something exciting and fun was going to happen there, but nope, it's not going to happen. One of the big ones, I suppose, are saving throws. And there's a big question, I think, when saving throws become a moment of something, when everyone's hanging on, seeing that dice roll, is it going to come up a 6? Are you going to beat impossible odds and fight through to the end? And when saving throws become overly predictable and just become, oh, okay, I rolled a load of dice to hit, I rolled a load of dice to wound, and then you rolled a load of dice to save, and nothing happened, and the game state didn't advance in any way, shape, or form, and I don't know why any of us bothered doing any of it.
The absolutely canonical example for me for this, like, making nothing happen is the sort of the counter spell effect, whether it be in Magic the Gathering or whether it be the dispel scroll in Warhammer. Like, I'm about to do something amazing and cataclysmic that I have built up to, but nope, it doesn't happen. And particularly as I was researching Hobgoblin and reading a lot of old Warhammer Fantasy Battle reports from, maybe 4th and 5th edition, there was an enormous volume of the sort of to and fro of the Magic phase of that game was, I'm going to do a thing, no you're not. I'm going to do a thing, no you're not. I'm going to do a thing, okay, I'm going to take all the magic away so that we can't do any more things. And that, I think, is for me, like, it's a canonical example of when we're talking about the games that we're designing and when we're playtesting the games that we're designing, we're constantly looking for these places where the game went, did you think something cool was going to happen? Nope, it doesn't happen. No cool thing. And just asking the question, okay, why did the game take that away? What happens if the game doesn't take that away, instead gives it to you and then finds another way to provide the benefit that you were going to get from an absence and provide the same benefit, but with like 2 things rather than no things. So I think that's where we'll spend some time diving into today for sure.
Yeah. So I think the reason that moments of nothing happen within what are otherwise good game designs is that the perception, the idea is that success in what you're trying to do in a game equals control. If you are successful, you gain control of the game state, you gain control of the game, you're able to control achieving the things you're trying to achieve. And a lot of the time, control equals turning off your opponent's ability. It's significant that blue nope decks in Magic the Gathering are referred to as control decks. That's what they're called. It's about controlling the game state. Whereas failure a lot of the time in games doesn't necessarily mean not doing anything. It often means doing something that you weren't intending. It's sort of, sometimes I think ideally anyway, it can be a sort of a moment of chaos. You've lost control. You don't know what's going to happen. Random results are going to come out from that. And so I think, the point to sort of look at here is to say, rather than making the moments of success and control about switching off an opponent's ability, try and look for ways to make it about you, the active players, switching on an ability, doing something that active that they have control over, and try and make failure about uncontrolled and chaotic moments for the person who has failed, rather than success means that I switch off what you were trying to do, and failure means that what you were trying to do simply doesn't happen. Because those are two sort of routes towards nothingness, and they're routes that are built in order to understandably punish failure and reward success within a sort of a slightly simplified game state. It's simpler to just say, okay, things get switched off. You know, that way I don't have to follow the exploding tree of possibilities. I could just go, it gets turned off, nothing happened. Now we can sort of move on to the next element. But I think,
and I think that partly, like for me, it also partly undermines the emergent cinematicness of a tabletop war game, where you follow an interesting chain of like moments that have been, you know, they've been dice rolls, but you're like, okay, so I like try and find out who shoots first, and then we see if I shoot, and then we see if we wound, and then I didn't, you know, get the armor save, and then I don't pass, you know, I failed my I passed my armor save, or I passed my shield save or something. And so all of that exciting cinematic stuff kind of led to nothing, and we kind of wasted our time doing it. And so I guess like part of that, you know, part of that, like, can I fail in a way, or can I force your hand in a way where, like, instead of the spell not happening, the spell happens, but I get to push it somewhere, or you get to suffer some damage, or like I get a bonus on my next spell, or like just some knock-on effect where it's like, yes, that thing does happen, and I've now taken some control off you, or I've got some benefit or push forward. And I guess to a degree, like, some of my thinking about this came from tabletop role-playing, where systems like Savage World, and most importantly probably the Star Wars like narrative dice system, which has some really interesting ideas about success and failure and so forth. Like, that was all interesting grist for the mill of thinking about, you know, when we have a dice result and it goes not my way, or I have a command or a control ability and I want to influence what you're doing, like, if the answer is nope, is there just a different way of looking at that, and a different way of pushing the game into telling more stories rather than sort of retroactively cancelling the story that we just told together?
And I think it's worth considering that not only is chaos for failure and active achievement for success more fun, because more stuff is happening on the tabletop, it also has a knock-on effect where the thing about chaos is that a better player will do better from chaos occurring than a weaker player, a player who isn't able to adjust on the fly and adapt to it. And it interestingly can mean that if you have random events that cause somebody to fail something they were attempting, and it wasn't necessarily their fault, and it was a certain amount of randomness, it doesn't then wrest the game away from the hands of the more skilled player. The more sort of chaos as opportunity moments that occur within a game, to a certain degree, obviously there is, you know, a level where your game just breaks down into chaotic moments, you know, the more opportunities there are for a skilled and adaptive player to take advantage of those. So I think, again, you know, putting in chaos for failure and active control for success increases the fun and increases the skill level of the game, rather than, because I think this is one of the issues, is that I think there's a perception that control as nope is in many ways a more skilled way of playing. I think there is a perception, I don't think it's accurate, that, you know, in Magic the Gathering, control decks are often seen as a particularly high level skilled way of playing the game. And I think a lot of the time sort of armies in Warhammer and other tabletop miniatures games that shut down and control opponents, remove their opportunities, make more dead phases, are seen as being more skilled armies than ones that just throw a lot of mud at the wall and see what sticks and try and do something in every single phase and just try and constantly be active. I think it's
do you think that to a degree it's potentially because in a number of those cases there's very little comeback in those particular systems, and so in some regards like it's a very winner's choice. Like it might be a negative play experience, but if your objective is to optimize for victory and you do something which essentially eliminates the person's opportunity for tactical response, then chaos is interesting, but nullification is like it's so much more reliable. Like it doesn't allow space for good players to come back because you've essentially just noped their ability to say anything, whether or not the thing they were going to say was clever or stupid.
Oh no, absolutely. And I think that, and it's a whole other discussion, I think, talking about Magic the Gathering. I genuinely think there's a point where parts of the Magic the Gathering metagame suffer from the ability for certain players to build decks that create a lot of dead cards in other decks, where a significant portion of the skill of the game is building these decks that just go, well, before we're even playing cards where I turn off what you're doing, I've inherently turned off half of your deck just by virtue of what cards I've got here. And that is sort of a very high level of play, but it does absolutely kick the ribs at a lot of the casual fun of the game. And I think it's why some players turn away to other trading card games where they're like, okay, well, what I want to do is I want to build a bunch of stuff on the tabletop and see what it can do, and I want to see us both playing and then see who plays best. I don't want to see one of us playing and the one of us not playing, and the one not playing just going, oh, right, okay.
So going back to one of the things that you were saying about control versus chaos, like just for discursive purposes, like one of the mechanics that I think exists from older school GW designs, which very much fits into this, is the way that grenades and missiles scatter. So like or cannons, like instead of you roll a dice, you see whether you hit or you miss, it's like you roll a dice and then you see whether or not it travels somewhere around. And so in some regards, like for discursive purposes, like, isn't it more fun if you scatter every missed bullet in a game of Warhammer 40,000? Like, shouldn't we just roll the scatter dice every time I miss? It's like, whoa, I missed and I accidentally shot this guy, or I shot that guy, I shot this guy. And I think it goes to that point you were saying where it's like you were sort of dropped in like within reason, like you can't have chaos everywhere. But like from a games design perspective, how do you start to find the places where you have to have some nullification or some just like saving throws just mean it doesn't happen versus everything is a cascading ball of subsequent consequences that echo around the battlefield with every dice roll?
I think one of the big helps here is, and it's something that you should always, I think, refer to in games design, is to look at the narrative of the situation. In Malifaux, for example, you don't bother finding out where a bullet goes if it misses, unless you're firing at somebody who's fighting somebody else in melee combat, and then where the bullet goes where it misses is into one of the other people that they were stood right next to. And that's because firing into a melee is an obvious dramatic moment. There's an obvious narrative there where two people are struggling back and forth. Oh, shoot him, no, shoot him, hold him up in the way, and etc., etc. And stopping for that moment to put in an extra bit of resolution and an extra bit of event makes sense. It's narrative. It's worth the juice is worth the squeeze of going, okay, when it happens, then we see where the bullet goes, as opposed to you're firing at somebody and there's no one else around them for like 50 meters, and then you miss and we go, okay, well, let's see how far you missed by. And it's like, well, you never ever hit somebody because you never scatter that far across, but we've got to go through the rigmarole every time. Chaotic active failure in this way that isn't quite so strong is in Test of Honor. There's a system where if you fumble, you hurt yourself. And it's one thing when you're in a sword fight, because it feels like, okay, that's the other person parrying and hitting you back. It's quite another when you're firing a bow and your character is the samurai who is the most skilled bowmaster in all the land, and he's firing across an open field in daylight at a person standing in the middle of the field, and he manages to shoot himself directly in the foot with his arrow, and you feel like, okay, that arrow should have just missed. It definitely should have just missed. We shouldn't have then discovered that it lodged into my shin bone. Why is that even an option? Why is that even a possibility? You know, that should never turn up. I think, you know, I mean, I think the answer that you were sort of leaning to there is that if we track the scatter of every missed bullet within a game of, for example, 40k, we would all want those bullets to end up lodging in our skulls very early, partway through turn one, because it would be a horrifyingly grinding and unpleasant experience. What we want is to identify which misses and failures are happening within a cinematically and narratively interesting moment, and then track where they go, and the rest of them, fine, yeah, that bullet went, you know, off over a field and killed a pigeon somewhere.
Do you recall how the saga fatigue mechanic works? Because I'm trying to recall whether that is one of these mechanics where, because it's an interesting mechanic where you can push your units too far and they start to build up these like tokens, these negative tokens, which then become a resource for your opponent. And I can't remember what you can spend them for, because it's been a couple of years since I played Saga, whether it's to give negatives to the other player, or whether it's to be able to take additional actions or additional attacks when you get in, because I'm trying to recall which side of the fence it falls on.
I mean, it's very multi-purpose, because it has, I would say, both of the ends of this particular coin. There are options where you can use it to reduce a unit's movement distance by one of the categories.
Oh, that's right.
And that's very much the case where, you know, somebody's like, well, I'd like to charge you, but I can't, because you will obviously spend my fatigue and knacker me out before I get to you, and then I'll just be stood in the middle. And there are times I think personally that Saga, when it's working well, it has that moment where two exhausted combatants are sat at opposite sides on the battlefield, getting their breath back after hacking through X many units, staring each other down, and like, I can charge you, but I can't charge you because I'm too exhausted. But I'm staring at you with hatred, and I'm getting my energy back up, and then it's time to go back in again. I think that against less experienced opponents, it can be a bit of a gotcha. And I think if you're less experienced, it can catch you out where you can spend turns just being noped by your fatigue. And hopefully, I suppose it happens in a lot of games where it's that sort of learning curve where the first time you play it, the fatigue kicks you in the teeth and you have potentially no fun. But hopefully you're both learning at the same rate and you figure out as you go along. But if you are a less experienced player, I think playing a more experienced player at Saga, that mechanic can just kick all your fun into a fan, basically.
Yeah. So one of the examples of me trying to work with this, turning a moment of nothingness into a moment of somethingness, was in Mystic Skies, which is in Blaster Volume 2, and it's the Magic Carpet Wizards game. And so the wizards themselves use Gaslands templates, and they scoot all over, and they get way more activations than all the basic monsters and minions that are flitting about on the ground. And as you race around on your Magic Carpet, you get a sort of hazard token equivalent called Peril. But the way that I ended up designing Peril in the final version was, it becomes a resource a bit like fatigue, which you can spend. If I have it, you can spend it. I can't do anything with it. It's actually inert for me, but you can spend it, and you can basically just turn it into additional spell casting or additional, I can't remember, oh, it's an additional move as well. So it's sort of, rather than, so it's sort of a fatigue. So it could be like, oh, you can't have a spell or you can't move quite as far because you're tired out and you overextended. But maybe what's more exciting is that I get cooler as a reward for you overextending yourself earlier in the turn. So maybe I was cooler earlier, and then the pendulum swings because now I've got some of these peril tokens, and so I now take them back in order to cast another spell or make a longer move. And so I think in some regards, like, if you are looking for a control mechanic, resources can be a useful thing because they can move from one side of the boards to another, and they can give people stuff rather than taking stuff away. Clearly, you could make a nope economy where I pass my nope tokens over to you as I nope you, and then you nope me back, and now I've got my nope tokens. But I guess the point of this conversation is to urge you, like, reconsider that. Like, how can that be more stuff happens, more things rather than no things?
And I think it's interesting mentioning Mystic Skies, because again, Mystic Skies is a spell casting game, and on the first edition of it, the assumption was, well, it's a spellcasting game. Obviously, sometimes spells miscast. They sometimes fail. They inexplicably, you try to cast a spell and it just doesn't work and nothing happens. And there was a version of Mystic Skies earlier on where sometimes your spells failed, sort of more or less through no fault of your own. And there was a decision pretty early on to just say, no, they don't. You're a highly skilled wizard. These are your spells. You're the boss, and everybody else is your minions. Your spells work. They just work. Why shouldn't they work? Why is it more fun to put people through a process of rolling some dice? Is this going to work? Oh, I rolled a good dice. It worked.
I played this game because I want to be a badass wizard, and every time I try and be badass, like, am I badass? No, maybe I am.
Yeah.
This time this time I'm not.
It is one of those things where, again, the magic phase in Warhammer Fantasy Battle, where sometimes what happens is on turn one, your very expensive wizard bursts its head and you're basically 500 points down and you're now losing the game. And it's sort of like, okay, did anyone want to know who was best at rolling, not rolling 4 ones in a row? Was that what we're here to find out? Is that what we were trying to discover? Oh, I wonder who's best at not rolling 4 ones on 4 dice. Oh, it turns out it's me because your wizard's head just burst. And it's like, well, that's not what anybody's here to discover. That's not everyone's, turned up to the table to find out. Don't make those sorts of, I think that's a slightly different subject about.
Well, so in Mystic Skies, like, you automatically cast your spells and you get to tear about doing all kinds of spells, and the more you do, the more potentially your opponent gets to do, and so they get to do quite a lot of things, but then they start doing more things and you get some stuff back. But underneath that, or rather, like, below the magic carpets, down on the sandy ground where all of the monsters and minions are fighting, there's a fairly standard combat resolution system where skeleton warrior charges into archer and rolls some dice, and sometimes they hit and sometimes they don't, and when they hit, sometimes the saving throw goes off and sometimes it doesn't, and there's a wound. And to a degree, like, for me there's a delightful and desirable sort of undulation of the sort of ultimate something versus nothing, which is, I had some toys and now I have no toys. Like, should we have models being taken off? Should we have a consistent set of models that we have for the entire game, and then the game ends and we find out who wins? Or is it exciting to have some toys and then have fewer and fewer toys? And in the process of that, is it interesting to have a combat system where sometimes I lose my soldier and sometimes I don't lose my soldier? And, like, short answer, like, yes, I think all of that is good. I think that's, like, part of the rhythm of a tabletop miniature war game that revolves around combat. But I also recently, with Hobgoblin, had been playing around very much with that idea, and we talked about it on a previous episode, of, like, is it interesting to kill your thing immediately, or is it interesting to kill it slowly, or maybe know that it's dead but it still gets a final attack? There's a number of different examples in games where if I kill something, it gets like a last, like, I'm going to do one final attack, like you would in a horror movie or something. And most recently I've been playing the very recent version of Warhammer 40,000 Apocalypse, which is a sort of hark back to the Epic 40,000 and previous versions of 6 mil Space Marines. And that's got a really lovely mechanic where, you know, stuff takes all this damage, and then you have your turn and your stuff starts handing out damage, and then I have another activation and hand out a load more damage. And after everybody's had a chance to push all their tanks around and make pew pew noises, then at the very end of the turn we find out, does anything die? And that, I think, is a nice maneuver of taking a bunch of things where you could be told, no, you're not allowed to have fun with that Titan that you just painted or whatever, and just push it to a different point in the turn sequence, in the resolution sequence, and say, okay, the nothing was going to be, I don't get to attack with this weapon because it got taken off the table, and instead the something is, fine, we know that it's dead, I will react, or we're very sure that, you know, the high probability it's going to be dead at the end of the turn. I now have a new tactical choice about how to, you know, now I can press with the attack, or I can do something very risky with it because I know it's kind of on the end, on its last legs, but I still get to do something, and you still have to deal with the fact that it's there. And the first turn sort of problem of like, okay, whoever rolls initiative basically wins the game sort of evaporates. So I do think that that is a lovely example of, you know, I borrowed it for Hobgoblin because I think it's a phenomenal answer to the question.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the big things that in boxed tabletop games, laddering is a huge part of designing those sorts of games, where that laddering being that you should always be able to do more on turn 2 than you could do on turn 1, and you should definitely always be able to do more on the last turn of the game than on the first turn of the game. And that's something that's hammered in, you know, a lot of games design advice says make sure that happens, that has to happen. And if you pitch a game to a publisher in which that doesn't happen, it'll be one of the first things they'll come back to you with. In tabletop miniatures wargaming, basically no game has laddering. Very, very rarely do you ever get a bit. You might get an aura, you might have a summoning thing that can get like 1 or 2 extra guys, but by and large you will end every single game able to do less than you started able to do. You have fewer and fewer moments of something, is just the established rule of those kinds of games. You are on a sort of entropic journey towards absolute nothingness in every single one of these games, and it's whether you manage to claw out what you needed to do before you hit final entropy and you can do absolutely nothing, and your opponent is fundamentally trying to smush you into a point where you have no more fun available to you because you are completely powerless. One
of the ways that that's described as a positive is acceleration. Like, people like a war game that accelerates in the last couple of turns, like things, you know, you set everything up, it takes ages, you start to move everything on the first turn, it takes ages, like, you know, you get the spectacle, but then once the spectacle has started to unfold and you realize one side is really starting to get the upper hand, you kind of want to start clipping along and be like, okay, we get it, let's get to the end of this, let's re-rack.
Yeah, but I suppose the point of it is that, you know, there is something to consider here as to whether there are ways of maintaining the somethingness that people do through the game, whether, you know, finishing out by slaughtering everybody and reaching that tipping point where you know who's going to get slaughtered, and so you may as well crack on with it, is the only way to design a finishing out point. And, you know, if you've got an objective based game and you know that whoever achieves the objective is going to win the game, and killing people is really not going to win you anything, it's just a tactical advantage to manipulate the achievement of the objectives. You know, there is a significant question there to say, it's like, well, why are you having anything taken off of the table ever? You know, if the point is to, you know, do this objective, why do things get taken off the table? Every time something is taken off the table, that's a bit of fun taken away. There's someone going, that thing that's fun there, off, away with that, and that one, and that one. And if you and a lot of
it's interesting to sort, because I haven't played Marvel Crisis Protocol. I'd quite like to, because one of the things that I find very interesting about the cinematic physics of superhero fights is that the primary resolution of every attack is to maneuver the enemy to another location. And I don't know whether Marvel Crisis Protocol does this, but like, in this scenario that you're describing, hypothetically, like I'm playing Infinity, but bullets don't kill people, bullets move people. And maybe some of them move me towards you and some of them throw me away. And, you know, Malifaux has a lot of these push and pull, these lures and these pushes effects. And in a game, as you say, that has, you know, ground, you know, area control and objectives on the ground, like, you know, maybe moving things is just significantly more interesting than killing things and wounding things. And who gives two hoots? Because then we all start with 8 models and we all finish with 8 models, and the configuration of those 8 models is deeply interesting at all points.
Yeah, I mean, Marvel Crisis Protocol, I believe, has a sort of momentum-based system, essentially, where the cooler thing you do, the cooler next thing you can do. It always stuck in my mind because I have a little free-to-download game available on Mannequin Games, which
Links
has basically...
below.
And it came out before Crisis Protocol, and purely coincidentally, it has basically, you know, a 4-page version of the same sort of the mechanics. And the whole idea of it is that neither of you can be killed. You know, you're superheroes. The point is, as you do more and more impressive things, you build up a certain sort of momentum. So at first you can walk, and then you can run, and then you can run like the Flash, and then you can run up a wall, and then you can jump into the air and fly 50 feet up, and then come pounding down and smash somebody into the floor, and then pick up a building and crack them over the head with it. And because the whole point of that game is, let's just become more and more and more and more impressive until the world explodes, and then we know, you know, who won the game. And yeah, and I'm a big believer that figuring out ways to not just suck fun out of the game is, games should be fun engines. You should put effort in and you should get fun out, and you should get fun commensurate with the amount of effort you put into it. Let people play with their toys and have moments of something, turn those moments into elements of chaos rather than elements of destruction.
Yeah, just as you start to sum up there, like another just sort of final example there is, as I was examining damage, like critical damage in A Billion Suns, I was looking at a number of other game systems where a very natural thing to assume is, as I take, if I've got a model with lots of wounds or damage, for example, like as I take damage, I should probably start to lose my capabilities as I get crippled and systems get blown up, or I get wounded, or I got an arm chopped off. Like I should do less damage, I should have less saving throw. And like, I guess this line of thinking about this, like something rather than nothing, leads you to ask the question, well, why is it more exciting for my crippled ship to get progressively weaker and more rubbish and less cinematic and less able to do the things that are cool on the table, until the point where it sort of poops out of existence and goes, oh, okay, I'm dead, fine. Rather, what happens in A Billion Suns is 2 things. One is it maintains full combat effectiveness until it explodes. So you still have the same amount of guns and everything at the beginning as you did at the end. And like, there's a part of you that's like, narratively, does it work? Cinematically, does it work? But like from a game decision-making point of view, it's interesting because you're not being told there's progressively crummier decisions to be made. And the other thing is that in order to have some critical damage effect, like what critical damage does is it risks you taking additional damage if you attack. So if you attack and you roll, I can't remember what the rule is off the top of my head, but if you roll the wrong number, then you get, if you roll a dud, in fact, then you get some damage. So what that does is it sort of accelerates your explodey demise, which is fun. Everyone likes an explodey demise. And it's a risk that you get to decide how many shots you're going to take, even though you know that you're standing on a keg of ammunition, which has no longer got its magnetic ceiling intact. But it's not like almost every other game where it's like, okay, I had 8 dice and now I've only got 4 and now I've only got 2 and this is kind of depressing. And what am I going to do with this crippled hunk of rubbish? And, you know, at some points in that game's design, that was the rule. And, you know, we were sat there with these crippled hunks of rubbish going, well, this is tedious. Why do we have to push around these crippled hunks of rubbish?
Yeah, and I think one of the places that, you know, we came to this design principles way back in time. The you can only turn left version of Gaslands. There was a point where if you took too much damage in Gaslands, you lost the ability to do certain things. One of the ones was turn left, and one of the things that caused you damage in Gaslands was changing gear. There was a version where you changed gear and it caused you hull damage, and it was just like, well, just a minute. So I changed gear, the doors fall off, and then I can't drive left anymore. This is horrible.
That's how you write a game, people.
This is absolutely horrible. It was a very early version, but it was just all right. So now I just can't. I've attempted to drive, and the response for me attempting to drive is I can now not do anything.
I've been watching a lot of Smokey and the Bandit.
And you can see that it's evolved right through to the sort of final version of Gaslands, where you do stuff and you do stuff and you do stuff until you blow up in a ball of fury, flipping through the air, and stuff happens, and when you wipe out you spin and you flip, and when you die you flip and you explode. Punish failure with chaos. Reconsider whether your models need to get taken off, specifically if you're looking at a objective based scenario game. Why do any models ever need to be taken off?
Can I give one final utterly canonical example of this? There is a rule in every Games Workshop game that says after you have re-rolled a dice, you cannot re-roll the same dice again. Why? Yes. Why can't I re-roll the dice again?
Yes.
Because you said so. Like, yes. Maybe that's fun. Maybe I want to roll it again. Why did you take that something away from me and leave me with nothing?
Yes, I mean, we genuinely, and it's a good place to finish, because I think we should definitely have a conversation about the random dogma rules in tabletop game design, and because I think yes, you can't re-roll a re-roll.
Why?
You can't. One's always miss and 6 is always hit. Is one that always bugs me.
I have opinions on that one.
I might
actually go to bat for that one.
And that's part of why I want to have the conversation, because I think it's just as much part of the dogma as you can't re-roll a re-roll. But anyway,
well, there we go. Trailers, people, trailers.
Yeah, we will sign off there. At some later point, we will have a conversation about assumed tabletop miniatures skirmish game rules. But for now, if you've watched through to this point in the video, I assume you like some strange part of what we're doing. Please, if you do, like and subscribe. If you don't, or if you just have opinions about great points in games where what could have been a flat moment turned into a moment of somethingness, please drop a comment in the comments section. We'd love to hear from you. Love to hear your opinions on this subject and many others. And if you don't like the idea of us chatting about strange tabletop dogma, suggest a different topic or title for a conversation.
Or in advance of that session, post in the comments of this video your most beloved or hated piece of tabletop dogma.
Absolutely.
Don't touch my dice.
For now, we will sign off, and we'll say thank you for watching and goodbye from this episode of Rule of Carnage.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.